Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Key Legislative Updates for the Hourly Workforce in 2019 and Beyond, sponsored by EPAY Systems. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and enter them there. I'll post a link to the slides and the exit survey in the chat area once the presentation has started. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Jennifer and Brittany from EPAY.
Thank you, Hester, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Jennifer, can you advance the slide, please?
There we go.
Well, I am Brittany Kowalczyk. I'm the Director of Marketing at EPAY Systems. I also have with me Jennifer Long. Jennifer is Special Counsel at Dwyer Morris, where she focuses her practice on management side employment law with an emphasis on practical and efficient resolution of workplace-related issues. She provides day-to-day counsel on matters related to employee misconduct investigations, wage and hour compliance, independent contractor and employee misclassification issues, leave of absence compliance, workplace investigations, code of conduct and restricted covenant development and compliance, global restructurings and reductions in force, and employee liabilities related to multi-jurisdictional mergers and acquisitions. Welcome, Jennifer. All right, can we see if we can go to slide number 3? For me, it's stuck on the update page.
I am advancing them. So if our hr.com assistant can
Hester, can you see what's going on?
No, because it's the PowerPoint's on your computer. I'm still seeing the title slide also.
Me too. All right. Well, let's see. Do you want to switch over and I can help me really quick? Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. If you make me the presenter, maybe I can.
Yeah, you're going to have to do that because I'm still on the same slide, Hester, that we were practicing on.
All right. Hester, can you make me the presenter? Let's see. You want to continue. Let's see. Can you? Oops. Well, that is the last slide. Can everyone see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? All right. Can you see our faces? Are we good?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So that's me. That's Jennifer. Small technical difficulties, but we'll roll with it. So next up is the agenda for today. So first, we're going to go through a little bit about EPAY Systems, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer, and Jennifer will go through what salary history bands require, what predictive scheduling is and why it matters to you, what you need to do from the employer side, and finally, we'll have a quick Q&A session. Just know if you have questions during the webinar, please write them down and we will get to them at the very end. So first, let's do a quick overview of who is EPAY Systems. EPAY has been successful in the human capital management technology space since 2001. We are a Chicago-based business that has always been about developing SaaS-based solutions for the employer with a hard-to-track, hard-to-pay, and hard-to-manage hourly workforce. Not only are these employees hourly, they're often distributed across multiple worksite locations. Some of our customers' employees are on the go or mobile, remote, or working for multiple customers at multiple sites throughout the day or week. It's a hard to track and hard to manage workplace, but it's what we know and it's the type of customers we love to serve. Since our inception, our priorities have always been centered around doing things smarter, making our services affordable, and going the extra mile for our customers. That's why some of the nation's largest building service contractors, staffing firms, venue managers, government entities, and healthcare companies call us their valued partner. Though we've been in the human capital management space for a while, we have a strong legacy in workforce management, sometimes called time and labor management or time and attendance. We believe that good workforce management controls is the secret to labor optimization, compliance, and labor cost reduction. That's why over the years we put so much R&D into our unique, flexible, cloud-based time and attendance system. We deliver top-notch customer service, offering premium 24/7 customer service for all. Our customers rave about our support, and we've got the proof with a 99% customer retention rate. All right, so that's a little bit about EPAY. Now I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer, and she'll dive right into an update on salary history bands.
Yeah,
so
thanks very
Jennifer,
much.
just let me know.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. And I'm going to try one more time just to see if I can manage to get our slides shared so that we don't have to keep saying next slide constantly. So let's see. Did that work for everyone? If it didn't, be sure to give a quick shout out. Here we are. We're going to start. You're good, Brittany? Okay, hopefully that means everyone else can as well. So welcome everyone. Thanks for the brief technical problems. We're going to start out with one of two main topics we're going to cover today, which are updates across the country in two key areas for the hourly workforce employer. We've been talking about these for quite some time in the case of the salary history ban, but now we are reaching a point that we are finding it in many jurisdictions, and we believe that wave is going to continue. So we want to make sure that everybody's aware of it, even if it hasn't come to the jurisdictions in which you operate yet. So what is a salary history ban? It's a prohibition under a state law, or we're seeing more and more under local ordinances, meaning municipalities and even counties, that prevents an employer from asking about, obtaining, using an applicant's prior compensation history during your screening process for new employees. It can prohibit things. Each of the statutes is different, and we'll talk about that from a compliance standpoint, but it can prohibit inquiries into an applicant's salary, their hourly rate, bonuses, commissions, even benefits that they're entitled to, and any other things that might be considered compensation. So I want to start out quickly to find out more from you guys. Does your company use an applicant's past salary to make your offers currently? And you see our options there. No, we don't use it at all. Yes, because we want to be competitive in the market. Yes, because we don't want to pay any more than what's necessary to get the applicant in the door. Yes, we want to screen applicants using this data point, and we'll talk more about what that means in many aspects. Yes, we want to test truthfulness during the background check process, or yes, for any other reason. And so the poll should be popping up there. We see companies that fall into many of these categories. Probably the most frequent one that I hear is that we don't want to pay more than what's necessary, that we want to be in the market and responding to the market, but we have a budget to meet and we don't want to pay more than we need to get good people in our door and to keep them. That's probably the most frequent one, but I do hear a lot also on that we use it as a screening point. The person that is over-exaggerates their wage or compensation data may not be a great candidate either for the position because they didn't actually perform what you're looking for at past employers, or from a truthfulness standpoint. So I see a lot of that response as well. I am seeing more and more employers that are taking it off of their system. Here we go. We've got a good number of responses in. Over 50% of you have responded. And I have over 50% of you do not use it when making offers. 20% for competitive market reasons. 17% yes, so that we don't pay any more than it's necessary. And the rest of you fell somewhere in between there. That was with about, I'm doing rough math, maybe 200 or so responses, just so that you can get a flavor there. And so we'll keep going, and there'll be another couple opportunities to chat about what you're doing. And so today we are telling you about updates in this legal arena throughout the country. One, I'd like to make sure that employers are aware of everywhere that you might be asking this question that you in HR may not be aware of. Of course, those of you that have chosen to take it off have looked at your application. And frequently I see it on the very front page, right up front in the top half of that first page of your application, or in the top few questions electronically in your electronic record. And it's just an upfront question. What was your salary at your last employer? Fill in the line. I also see it in other places that I'm noticing that employers may not catch when they're choosing to remove this question, or they're required to. They're entering into a jurisdiction that has a prohibition. You'll have the back half of your application that may say list all your past employers by position held, dates of employment, etc., location, maybe a reference number. And frequently I may see in that little section a box that you've forgotten about that says, last supervisor phone number, may we contact for a reference, and there's a little box there, what was your last salary? Or I frequently see starting and ending salary as a data point there. So double check your application in all spots to make sure you know exactly where it is. And then here are the variables that need to be looked at more from a training and process standpoint. Interviews, and we'll talk about the training that will be required there. In jurisdictions that prohibit salary history questions, you're going to need to make sure that all interviewers, not just your screening interviewers in the HR department who will be well versed in this, but all interviewers are trained and are aware that they can no longer ask that. And you will get pushback on that from your business partners. Business partners that have been interviewing candidates for a long, long time may say that's ridiculous, or they forget. It's not purposeful, failing to comply with HR suggestions or requirements or protocols or practices. It's forgetting. They've been interviewing people for 30 years and it's just something that they ask. So these are both areas that will have to be reminded early and often in these jurisdictions that are adopting these rules. And then the other area that you need to make an affirmative decision and reach out to is during your background check process, whether you do it in-house through somebody tasked with that effort, or most of you are probably using CRA vendors. But part of that package that you may have been presented by your vendor may have included employment reference checking, and part of that process may have included confirmation of past salary if the employer on the receiving end of that inquiry provides it. Most employers don't these days, but some do. And so you'll need to make sure that your CRA vendor has been informed that you no longer want to receive that information in the background check report, so that you're not receiving it by mistake. And so what are we talking about? We have a little problem with our dots there, but I think you can see that we now have 17 states that have a ban on asking about past salary history. And there's a quick list of them. They're spread throughout the country. Some of those are public employers only, but most of them are not. And many of them became effective very recently, 2019 and going forward into 2020. For instance, Illinois is going into effect just, let's see, about 3 days on the 29th going forward. We have 19 municipalities. Those are the biggest cities there, but there's many smaller ones, including some counties within states. And then for some of you, providing a little bit of relief, we have at least 2 bans on such bans. Michigan and Wisconsin the state legislature has adopted a preemption law, which is a law intended to prohibit smaller parts of the state, the municipalities and counties, from passing such a law. The theory being that the state wants to govern employee related issues. So here's our next poll. Does your company ask applicants or obtain information? No, we don't. Yes, it's a question on our application for all positions. Yes, it may be a question asked during the screening process, your initial screening interview after you've received an application. Yes, it may be a question asked by anyone somewhere during the background check process. By that I mean the actual background check, a criminal background check, etc. Or maybe, I can't answer as HR for sure because the interviewers may ask that during the supervisor or operations interviews, and then just a flat out not sure. I don't know because I've not really drilled down into this issue, or we're just starting to take a look at this issue because of all these new laws that are passing. Again, it's important if you don't believe that you do ask this question, that you have affirmatively reached out and determined that one way or another. Because I find that even in companies with the most sophisticated of HR, that is well aware of all the new obligations and is closely monitoring them, once we drill down into the business level unit interviewing process, we may not know, may not be certain of that the business folks are complying with those directives. So we have a good poll sampling back here. Well over 200 of you have responded. And we have 46% of you that do not ask or obtain any salary history. So that's great. You'll be in good shape to comply with the things that have been pointed out here. About 21% of you have it as a question on your application. And so for those of you in that position, you will need to look at your applications very closely, particularly in all those jurisdictions that I mentioned, and to keep this as a monitoring item for other jurisdictions, because we will see more activity in this area from additional legislators and local municipalities. 10%, yes, it's a question asked during the screening process. 2%, it's a question asked during the background check process. 11%, maybe. I'm not sure exactly what our interviewers are asking. And 10% are not sure overall. So this will be your opportunity to take a further look. So what do salary history bans typically prohibit? The typical provisions may include a ban on asking, obtaining, or using salary information. And I'm highlighting those words because those are different verbs, to be sure. Definitely, most of them include a non-discrimination or retaliation provision. You can't retaliate against an employee for refusing to provide the information. Some of them may expressly allow the employer to discuss pay expectations, and that is a provision in many of them to allow employers some leeway. So you can ask under many of these statutes, what is your expectation, applicant, for this position for which you're applying? You can also provide pay minimum or scales and ranges, and we're recommending that to more and more employers as a way to pre-screen employees. This is the minimum that we expect for the position, or this is a scale or range that this position may fall in, depending on your years of experience, your education level, your certifications, many other factors. Some are permitting voluntary and unprompted disclosures to be used, but there's definitely a warning, a caveat on that we'll talk about. What is voluntary, what is unprompted? Exceptions definitely may include internal candidates and publicly available information. So folks coming from government positions where that is publicly available may be exempted, but I have seen some of the statutes that say not if you go and look for it. So you're exempted that it's out there, but that doesn't mean that you can do a Google search on everyone to see if they did have a public position. And so we're going to use just one of these, the very most recent, the Illinois salary history ban, as your example. Primarily because I practiced in Illinois and I'm most familiar with it, but also because it is a good example. It's similar to many that I've seen across the country. And so this will give you some good feedback on what you can and cannot do. And so just a brief history in Illinois here. On the very first day of our new Governor Pritzker's administration, he signed an executive order that prohibited all salary inquiries by state employers. This was a clear announcement and recognition that this was a key priority for his administration. And then very quickly thereafter, an amendment to the Illinois Equal Pay Act came through. It was introduced on January 22nd, just a few days after the beginning of his administration, for all private sector employers and recruiters. And by July, it had been passed and signed by the governor with a quick effective date. You'll see that just 60 days after signature, September 29th, so next week for Illinois employers. It had been previously passed twice by our legislature, so we all knew it was coming here in Illinois, and I've been warning, if you will, employers about it for several years of my training sessions, but it had been vetoed each time by the then Governor Rauner. What does the Illinois specific law require? It prohibits screening any job applicant based on their wage or salary history, even if voluntarily disclosed. So that's the caveat here in Illinois. Voluntary disclosures in and of themselves are not a violation of the salary history ban, the Equal Pay Act amendments, but you can't use it even if it has been voluntarily disclosed to screen that applicant. You cannot require an applicant's prior wages to satisfy minimum or maximum criteria. You cannot make a disclosure a condition of being interviewed or further considered for a position. You cannot inquire of a current and former employer anything about salary benefits or comp and salary history. And you can't condition an employer on any sort of waiver or disclosure in an authorization that you might use, for instance, in the background screening process. There are certain exceptions where it's publicly available. Current employees, obviously, you are privy to their full salary history, and voluntary disclosures, but I mentioned that you have to be so very wary with regard to those voluntary disclosures. The question, of course, arises, is anything truly voluntary in the context of an interview where you're feeling pressure to provide necessary information in order to be further considered for the position? You can expressly, under the Illinois Act, provide the compensation information for the position to applicants, and you can discuss an applicant's expectations. Again, that goes to the question of what are you looking for in this position? That is permissible expressly under the amendments. There are very limited defenses under the Act, and liability can be significant for violations. The Act provides for special damages of up to $10,000. Those are the types of damages that are provided in statutes where damages may be difficult to assess. And these types of cases certainly fall into that scenario, in that it would be difficult for a candidate to identify exactly, for instance, how much salary they missed out on by having had disclosed something about their prior history that was prohibited from disclosure. And then it also provides that an applicant may also seek and be entitled to compensatory damages. So if a candidate was able to establish, yes, this is the amount that I'm entitled to, they'll be able to pursue that as well in that amount over $10,000. They can seek injunctive relief, demanding that an employer stop the practice, civil penalties that will be attached to the amount owed. And then the kicker here, of course, is that there is an attorney's fee provision. Any of you that have had the misfortune of having handled any sort of employment type of action know that in these matters where the dollar value of any individual employee's claim may not be that significant monetarily, it is the attorney's fees that the employee is entitled to recoup for having prosecuted that claim against the company that are the driver of many of these actions, both from a value of the claim standpoint. When you are attempting to resolve a claim, it's attorney's fees that are frequently driving, have the hands on the wheel, if you will, but also from the potential of class actions. And this will be an area that will be ripe for class action, where an employee can say, this question was on the application, or this question was part of the routine screening process, because those are questions that will be typical to all applicants, and that's what's required for a class action, that there's typicality of the question involved, commonality of the question involved. And there's a 5-year statute of limitations. So claims arising under this issue can go back for 5 years. Excuse me. All right, next slide. And so what is next? What should you be looking out for, and what are your obligations here? As I've suggested, and it looks like over 50% of those on this call at least have either recognized or maybe been aware of, or have not used the information for quite some time, there are definitely both legal and talent acquisition reasons to drop the inquiries. From a legal standpoint, that's why we're here. You're seeing the wave. That wave will continue to expand, and at some point here we will reach a tipping point where there are more states than not that require this of employers. But then we go into the talent acquisition reasons, in that you may be excluding good candidates based on the information that you're obtaining, because it is not, of course, the be-all end-all of a data point. But if it has been used that way traditionally, you may be losing out on opportunities to look at good candidates that maybe are on a second career, are coming back from absence from the workplace for one reason or another, that may have sought an additional degree, etc. That a screening just based on salary information may not be the most valid talent point. And then, of course, the foundational reason for these statutes from the get-go has been the equal pay issues. Illinois is clear. They've dropped it into our equal pay amendment. In many other states and jurisdictions, it's a standalone legal change. But the reasons for these, when they started years ago, was so that folks that have traditionally been underpaid, and for the most part that means women and persons of color, are not any pay discrimination that they may have suffered at some point in their career is not perpetuated by basing future salaries on their prior pay data. So if you were underpaid at a position because you're a woman, because you've been because you're a person of color, or for some other discriminatory reason, that when the next employer asks you about your salary history and bases the offer on that salary history, that pay discrimination is not perpetuated by use of that information to make future offers. And so if your jurisdiction has a salary history ban, for instance, in Illinois, beginning September 29th, you must remove all questions everywhere. I encourage you to go through your onboarding packet and your applicant packet from start to finish, because you will be surprised sometimes where a question that has something to do with compensation does pop up. I encourage you to affirmatively ask all recruiters that you're using to make sure that they are fully compliant with these efforts. And so any recruiting platforms, whether electronic or in person, have removed the question from their systems and protocols and practices, and review your contracts with those recruiters to ensure that they agree that they are complying with that. And your vendors. We talked about background check vendors. Make sure that you're not getting information that you do not want to receive. That applies to more than just pay data. You may start looking at that question from, for instance, criminal background issues related to cannabis convictions in jurisdictions that have approved the lawful use of recreational cannabis. Just as an aside, that's a separate seminar, but throwing that out there as a bonus tip. And then an important point that I think even the most sophisticated employers may not have reached yet is to make sure that you have trained all interviewers, not just your screeners, your HR folks. In all likelihood, you will have closely trained them, but your business unit interviewers, those that you are passing the candidates on to. Make sure that you have added this on to their list of interview do's and don'ts, along hopefully with your tips about avoiding inquiries into protected categories and to ADA questions and things like that. Be sure that you've added it in there. Okay. I'm going to take a quick look. I saw a couple questions point up. Let's see. First question right off the top goes to that voluntary disclosure issue. Someone asked, what if the candidate shares the details with the interviewers without even asking them? That is the voluntary disclosure issue. It is going to be an issue. Sometimes it just pops up in response to a random question. I know it happens. The key thing then will be not to use it. You cannot use it. The interviewer should be trained not to pass it forward, quite frankly, so that the persons with that information are very limited. And the interviewer should be encouraged to say, you know what, we're not interested in hearing more about that. We'd like to focus on the parameters of our position. Okay, another question, same genre. I assume you can just ask what their salary requirements are to make sure the job pays what they want. And in most jurisdictions, that is okay. Again, you have to be careful on that it is phrased appropriately, that you are truly asking it as a what are you looking for. And you may want to take the extra step of making clear that you are not asking what their past salary is. Because for the less sophisticated applicant, that question, even though you've posed it correctly there, what are your salary requirements going forward, may be met with a, well, I make $10 in the position I have now. So you may want to phrase that question purposefully to say, what are your expectations for this position going forward? To be clear, we are not seeking from you any information about your past salary. Okay. There's several more here. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to move on and I will try to address them more at the end. Otherwise, you can reach out directly. The next update is on predictive scheduling laws. And that is what I think is going to be the next wave, similar to the salary history ban, for the hourly workforce. And so what are predictive scheduling laws? They are a similar type of prohibition under state or local ordinance that require employers to provide advance notice of work schedules. This is going to an employee's value of their position, their ability to schedule their life, essentially. And legislators are recognizing that especially employees in the lowest paid positions, those that may be cobbling together multiple jobs, for instance, or those that are balancing a low-paid job with childcare, elder care, and other responsibilities, that they deserve the predictability with regard to both when they will be expected to be at work in order to maintain employment, but also with regard to their compensation, so that they can predict how much compensation they will receive on a regular basis from their employers. Two things that, for the most part, as humans, we can all agree lead to a higher quality of life for everyone. That you know when and where you're supposed to be at work, what the expectations are for that, and that you can have some predictability with regard to what your weekly wage will be. And then finally, these predictive scheduling laws tend to include compensation from employers to the employees for changes in schedules that fall outside of the requirements of the laws. And so what might a predictive scheduling law require? To be clear, many different criteria, all will be specific to your local law. So to either your state law or your municipality law where you have operations, you will have to drill down at a very high level of specificity, because so far I have not seen the kind of overall generalities with the predictive scheduling laws, other than the main concepts, in advance notice of your schedule and your intended work hours. But the specific requirements of an employer and what will happen for violations have so far a wide range of variables. So you will have to make sure that you're compliant in each of your jurisdictions and we will continue to see waves of these laws coming forward. So you'll need to be on the lookout for them wherever you operate. What are some examples, though, that I can give you from the laws that are out there so far? The biggest one, I think, is a penalty or extra pay of some sort that goes directly to the employees that's related to changes. And it can be changes to the hours worked. For instance, going from an 8 hours a day scheduled down, cut back to 6. Your shifts, meaning you were originally scheduled 9 to 5, but now I'm changing that to 10 to 6. Or your work days. Normally you're scheduled Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This week you're going to be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. So any type of change can be a violation under these laws that can result in these extra payments. And I've given you a few examples of the extra payments here. It may mean that you get those extra hours paid. So even though you've cut back the shift from 8 to 6 hours, you still owe them payment, perhaps for the entire shift change. It may even be an overtime type of extra payment. So you're getting time and a half of your rate for the hours that were canceled. Maybe a penalty payment for canceled shifts. So I'm taking you off the schedule entirely for Tuesday. You're going to still get half time, for instance, for your normally scheduled shift hours. You're normally scheduled for 6 hours. I'm going to owe you 3 hours of pay for a canceled shift. All of those penalties and extra payments might differ depending on how much advance notice you're giving an employee of those changes. For instance, for a long period of time, 10 to 14 days in advance, for instance, there'll be no penalty under some of these laws. So up to whatever that deadline is under the statute, you'll be able to change your schedule freely. If you give some notice, but not as much as the statute wanted, like 48 to 72 hours, for instance, the penalty will be smaller. So the penalty will continue to increase as the amount of notice shrinks. And then in many instances, if you fail to give at least 24 hours of notice, you might be fully paying or be paying that, I'm calling it overtime. It's not overtime, but it's similar to the overtime pay requirement for any hours that have been changed. And then a second large component of many of these laws is a right to rest concept. And so there'll be a premium in either a prohibition entirely, or the employee will be allowed to decline without penalty, or significant premium pay for working back-to-back or very limited break shifts. So those are just kind of some of the examples of what you have to look forward to. So let's take a quick poll again. Does your company provide advance notice of your employees' work hours and their schedules? And we've got several options here. No, we routinely tell employees of their work hours or schedules with a limited amount of notice. And the example I'm giving you is like 24 to 48 hours notice. So only a few days notice of when we expect you in and how much you'll be working each day, for instance. Or next option, yes, we post schedules 10 days or more in advance. And for the most part, we stick to them except for employee requests. Or yes, we post schedules, but about 3 days in advance, except for employee requests. Or yes, we post schedules in advance, meaning more than 3 days, maybe up to 10 days, 2 weeks, but we do routinely change those according to business and operation needs, frequently with less than 24 or 48 hours notice of those changes. For instance, we see that we've got too many people scheduled for the volume of business we've been doing. We see this a lot in the retail and service environments. And therefore, we're going to cut you back from that shift we had scheduled you for 2 weeks ago. And then somewhere you fall somewhere in the middle of all of this. Those of you that are routinely changing them with less than 24 to 48 hours notice, and that is a big part of your operations, will have circumstances where you will need to look further into these laws, and most importantly, start talking to your operations people, even in jurisdictions that have not yet adopted them, to make sure they understand that this is coming forward. And so we need to start to develop a plan, even if the law hasn't been passed yet in your jurisdiction, for responding to this as we go forward.
Hey, Jennifer, it looks
Yes.
like the poll is the incorrect poll. Looks like we have the direct deposit poll pulled up.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. I missed this poll, and what I'll do is I'll run it on the other in a few minutes, if that's okay with you. I just have to add it in. If that's okay, I can run it on the next poll slide.
Sure.
Not a problem.
Sorry
Sure.
about that. I missed that one totally, and I double checked it too. So.
Sorry.
Anyway,
so we'll just skip ahead, and if we get it, we'll update you on that.
Yeah.
So where do we have these laws? Where do you need to be concerned? So far, and some of you responded to the direct deposit one. That's a preview of our very last slides. Maybe can we set that aside, and we'll talk about it at the end? So if you can just grab that information, maybe pop it up at the end, I'd appreciate it. So thank you. So predictive scheduling laws so far, just 3 states, but I will warn you that seems small, and you say to yourself, oh, Oregon, Vermont, and New Hampshire, not exactly the highest population states in most companies, or the most obvious places for locations in anything other than a business that operates in all 50 states. However, this is a wave. So those are the first. We will see more, as evidenced by the municipalities. We have at least 7 municipalities, and you'll see all the major cities there: Chicago, New York, DC, Philly, San Fran, Seattle. So the wave of these laws frequently starts with the municipalities, because quite frankly, the ordinances are far easier to pass than the state legislation is. And so you will see more. If we were to hold this session in a year, 18 months, I guarantee that we'll be looking at perhaps 10 or more states at that point. I don't guarantee. I'm sorry. I highly predict. Otherwise, I would go to Vegas and put money on something. But in any case, and then we do have interesting one state in Georgia that has specifically banned predictive scheduling laws. We do have several others that have general preemption laws. Arkansas, Iowa, and Tennessee prohibit municipalities generally from passing employee-related laws. So we'll continue to see that, ban on bans or preemption laws to continue to be a factor. And so again, I'm going to use one example, the Chicago Fair Workweek Ordinance, as an example, because again, it is pretty typical of things that you might see, and because we have to pick one, we can't cover them all. This is very recent also, so it's popped just up to the forefront. It's effective July 1 of 2020. It, however, had sat there for quite some time. It was first introduced back in 2017. It was considered here and there, never really came up for a full vote. But then here in 2019, when Chicago had a new mayor elected, it popped right up to that mayor's one of her top priorities, and was passed very shortly after she took office. And so what does it require? It says that covered employers, and what is a covered employer? Under this statute, it is this ordinance, it's an employer with 100 or more employees. There is a caveat for nonprofits. They need to have 250 more employees, 50 of whom, so at least 50% of your workforce is a covered employee. And we'll get to that on the next slide, so hold tight on that. And your company is primarily engaged in a covered industry. And we'll hop to that. And so what is a covered industry? A lot. It includes employers in all of these areas. Healthcare, it does delineate those holding specific licenses with the state. However, that's many. It's nursing homes, it's hospitals, assisted living, I believe. It's many of the top healthcare employers. Building services, hotels, restaurants, manufacturing, retail, and warehouse services. So I think there we have covered all, or very close to all, of the hourly workforce industries. So we've touched on all of them. And then what is a covered employee? So to reiterate, you have to be a covered employer in a covered industry with a covered employees in order for this to apply and for the employee to be entitled to compensation. A covered employee includes everyone, even temps. And you'll see there that the criteria Chicago set is very low, 420 hours in 18 months. So that includes almost all of your employees. That averages out to 5 or 6 hours a week on a part-time basis. So it's certainly your most companies' regular part-time employees. The majority, not all, but the majority of the employees' work is physically within the city of Chicago city limits. The majority of the employers' work is in a covered industry and the employees. And then here is the caveat that does help a little bit. The employee has to earn less than $50,000 a year or $26 an hour. So it is intended for the lower wage employee, although $26 an hour, even in Chicago, which is inching towards the $15 an hour and the Illinois new requirement by 2025 being at $15 an hour minimum wage, $26 an hour still is significantly over that and will capture most of the hourly workforce, except at the very highest level of positions, except at the very highest of non-exempt positions. Covered employees don't include those covered by a collective bargaining agreement, union employees. If it was already in effect on July 1 when this ordinance goes into effect, or if it was after, if the collective bargaining agreement comes after July 1st, if it clearly and unambiguously waives this requirement in the collective bargaining agreement, meaning your union can bargain on the employee's behalf to waive this requirement, usually in exchange for other benefits of some sort. Okay, and so what does it require? Several things, several components here. Pre-hire, meaning with the offer letter, you have to provide a good faith estimate in writing of the projected days or hours for the employee's first 90 days. So when you hire one of these covered employees, you're telling them this is what we expect your schedule to look like in good faith. You have to post a notice. There'll be a notice published here for employers to publish with your posters, and a notice included for new hires. Many payroll companies offer this as part of their requirements to include that, so look for that with your providers. And then here's the guts of it. You have to have written notice of your work hours at least 10 days before any new schedule, and that's going to be increased. You have 2 years to work that out. In 2022, July 2022, that advance notice period is going to be up to 14 days. So you have to give 14 days notice of your schedule. Anything after that will be subject to these requirements. So you have to give advance notice for any schedule changes. You need to have a process to consider any employee-specific requests about their schedule and to notify a decision to that employee in writing within 3 days of that request. So employee says, I'd like Thursday off. You need to respond to that in writing within 3 days, either yay or nay. What are your penalties going to be in Chicago? Up to the advance notice deadline, so up to either that 10 days or in 2022, the 14 days, there'll be no penalty for changes. You can change it as operation needs fit up to that. Within the deadline, so once you're past the 10 days or the 14 days, the employee will get an hour of predictability pay for each change in shift. Those changes can include a change in the date, the time, extra hours, a canceling of on-call hours. It can be many different changes. And then at less than 24 hours notice, for instance, for canceling shifts, they're going to get half pay for all hours not worked. There are some exemptions and exceptions, and this will be where you'll need to get a clear practice and protocol in place. Where it's agreed in writing at the employee's request is the key one. So employee requests, but they need to be in writing going forward. And I know many, many of my hourly workforce employers are not yet in a position to have that process in place. Hey, Soup, can I get this afternoon off? Yeah, sure, no problem. Those kind of situations are now going to have to be dealt with much, much more in writing in order to avoid these potential problems. And then, of course, it does have some acts of nature types of exceptions, and a few other exceptions for particular things. For instance, major ticket venues like stadiums have a specific call out under the Chicago Ordinance. You have to hour any extra hours. So you're adding on shifts. You have to offer them to existing employees first prior to hiring. There are some exceptions for that, where overtime might be required or where you don't have any qualified employees to take on the time. And here's that specific right to decline provision that I talked about. Employees have that right without termination or retaliation effect if they do agree to work a shift that begins less than 10 hours following the end of their prior shift. They get a premium, 1.25 times their regular rate. No retaliation, and then here's your liability, $300 to $500 per offense, and that could mean every time in a week that could include 4 or 5 violations. I sent you home early, I changed your start time, all of those are an offense. There is a private right of action. However, a little bit of help, there is an administrative exhaustion required before the Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, which is unusual. It's not before the Human Rights Department, so it will be handled a little bit differently than you may be accustomed to. So what are your next steps? We've talked about them throughout. You need to prepare your business units to start being able to anticipate getting a schedule out 10 to 14 days in advance and sticking to it. For changes, you're going to need to have policies. You're going to need to have written change forms if you don't already use those. And how are you going to use your technology to help you? So how are you going to use your system providers like EPAY to help you adapt to these changes? You have a document retention requirement for your schedules. I'm sure there are employers on the line that are still just tacking schedules up in some types of industries. So you're going to have a much more extensive document retention for that, and the changes. So are those changes being dealt with crossouts? I know in the retail and service environment, that's still the case, that you have the nice technology-driven schedule that originates 14 days out, but then all those changes are written over in black ink, red ink, etc. And so how are you going to capture all of those? Make sure you've got your required notices and your pre-employment documents ready. And then we're wrapping up here on that topic. I will try to get some of your questions here as we turn over. But one final bonus topic that we wanted to throw in is the direct deposit wage payment laws, many of which that have been on the books for some time, but there have been some states that have jumped into the fray. And just to make sure that you folks are aware of your requirements there, because we do see that as an area that employers are really wanting to move forward with. What are your compliance requirements under state or local laws for requiring direct deposit of pay? And what do those laws require? They dictate whether or not you can utilize, or whether or not you can require employees to utilize. Voluntary direct deposit is okay everywhere. But can you require an employee to utilize direct deposit for wage payments? And if you can, those state and local laws are going to expressly have express compliance requirements for how you can go about doing so. And so this was the poll we popped up there. I don't know if it's possible to throw that back up, but we were just looking into whether you do. Most companies, I think, are going to fall into that first one. Direct deposit is offered on a voluntary basis. But then a few more options. Yes, we require it to our bank, the employer's selected bank. Yes, we require it, but it's at the employee's choice. So fill in the blank for whatever bank you bank at. And yes, we require it, but we have an opt-out system in place or an alternative method, debit cards, checks, etc. Okay, and I'm going to skip ahead so that I can keep going on just get through the information here. We'll give you some feedback on that in a moment. And so what are the laws in this area? We have a number of examples. And here's the response to the poll. 48% of you, and again, I've got well over 200 responses here. 48% of you offer it as a voluntary basis. 2% of you do require direct deposit to the company's selected bank, and that is okay in certain jurisdictions. We're going to talk about it right here. 28% of you require it to the employees. You do require it, but to the employee's choice of bank. And then finally, 22% of you permit it, but provide an alternative method. I'm sorry, require it, but permit opt-out or have an alternative method. And so what are your requirements? Under the FLSA, you can require mandatory direct deposit, and 22 other states permit it as well. However, there are minimum requirements. For instance, under the FLSA, it's either at the employee's choice of bank or the employer's choice, but then you have to have other payment options available, meaning hard checks and other options. Under all of these 22 state laws, compliance requirements might include a variety of additional things. For sure, probably the highest priority one is that there are no fees associated with receiving the funds out of that direct deposit. Might also include that the employee is required to be able to permit their bank. Opt-outs, more and more laws we're seeing that require access to, so meaning electronic paychecks are now acceptable in a lot of places. There are a few states remaining that do require printed pay stubs. Some of these laws apply to certain industries. They're trying to capture employers in the lowest paid industries or certain employers. Okay, and your next step in that area is to make sure you fully understand what your direct deposit procedures that you have in place and that your authorization and mandates comply in each jurisdiction where you are operating. And so I think that wraps up. I'm going to try to toggle over here.
Can I hop in really quick while
Absolutely.
you do the Q&A part and get everything all set up? I just wanted to say thank you again, Jennifer, for hosting this for us. And as I said before, EPAY is one integrated human capital management platform specifically for the hard-to-track, hard-to-pay, and hard-to-manage hourly workforce. Our robust time and labor management can help you with any of your predictive scheduling needs like Jennifer covered. So with our easy-to-use drag and drop interface, you can create schedules in minutes and even schedule employees based on how close they are to a job and the skills required for the job. This will help ensure that you're complying with the predictive scheduling laws and will help increase the likelihood of your employees showing up to the job. So that was just my little quick EPAY spiel. Jennifer, are you ready to kick off a couple questions before we end? I think we have 2 or 3 minutes.
I am just going to pick up a couple here. So apologies.
Perfect.
Feel free to reach out with your direct question. I'm going to pick up a couple common ones. What if you ask someone to come in and cover for another person? The person can accept or refuse. That can fall into a couple categories. Did you cancel the shift? Did the person cancel the shift for illness? And then are they voluntary accepting those extra hours? Oftentimes the employee wants those extra hours, so they are. So under many of these predictive scheduling laws, that may be permitted, but it will need to be a written change in schedule. Whether or not the employee gets extra pay will depend not on the reasons for the extra coverage, but who initiated the request. And that may be important under the specific state law. So that is an issue, and it will come up for many of you, that you'll need to figure out the answer to in each of your jurisdictions in advance and have that as a part of your protocols and your written schedule change documents that you'll be implementing. A couple more here. Do predictive scheduling laws include both non-exempt and exempt position? Generally speaking, they don't refer to that language, but they are intended to protect the non-exempt, the hourly workforce. The concept of the exempt workforce usually is that you can set parameters of work required, and they are expected to perform that work. If you are an employer that has strict scheduling requires for exempt employees, it may also apply. You notice there in Illinois that you do have wage situations. And so oftentimes, for instance, here in Chicago, you won't have a lot of folks that are under that salary criteria of $50,000, especially now. Little update, if you haven't read your feed this morning, the USDOL came out with the new salary level is over $35,000 to be considered exempt. That will go into effect January 1st. And so you won't have a lot of folks that fall into there. Any leeway for changing business needs for predictive scheduling? You would love to have that, as all employers would, but that's the whole point of these ordinances. And so generally speaking, no, because that's what it's intended for employers to be able to say, oh, my business needs changed, and therefore I have to change your schedules. So I've just bumped over to 1 minute past the hour. So I recognize that there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to here. We tried to cover a lot and cover it in a way that hits most of you so that you have an awareness of this and that you can go out now and work with EPAY or your other legal providers to make sure you're fully compliant in all your jurisdictions. If you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And I thank you for everyone attending, and I look forward to getting on in the future with many of you.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archived recording will be available on the hr.com website tomorrow. The webcast credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.